The .Netcore Podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .netcore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .Netcore Podcast, an award-winning podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie GaProgMan Taylor, and in this episode I talked with Steve Peirce about Blazor, how he used it to build real-world applications, and what he's excited about in the .NET 6 release time for Blazor. Steve is one of the developers behind Powered for TV, which is a streaming service for pro wrestling content and an app that uses Blazor and a large number of functions and Azure services in a rather innovative way. Along the way, Steve gives us a quick catch-up of what Blazor is, the different ways to host and run Blazor apps, and a little bit about what WebAssembly is. Pro tip, it's not a Silverlight replacement. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So first thing I'd like to do, Steve, is thank you ever so much for being on the show, because we're all really busy people, and I'm always really appreciative of people who are going to take some time out of their day to actually talk to me about what gets them excited in the .NET space. So thank you very much for that.
You're very welcome.
Would you mind maybe starting off by giving us a brief introduction? A little bit of like who you are and the kind of work that you really enjoy doing. Maybe how you got into .NET, if you don't mind divulging that. It's up to you. After that, we've got the topic of Blazor to talk about, which I'm really excited about.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. I'm Steve Peirce. I'm currently a principal software engineer leading a full vertical team to design and develop distributed systems in Azure. How I got here? Well, I finished school and I didn't go to uni. I actually went straight into work. I went and worked in retail in a shop and I enjoyed the money. But I think talking to my dad, actually, he kind of said, either you need to work your way like up and have a good career, or do you want to pivot and do something else? So I decided that I wanted to pivot and go towards like computers and programming and things. So I actually did a degree with the Open University for 5 years, whilst working full time. And that kind of got me that initial experience. And then I wanted a job, but I was struggling to get a job. So I actually decided to build a web app, and that kind of got me. I had a Windows phone at the time, one of the very few. So I built an app for Windows Phone, which was it was a game where like targets would pop up and you'd have to shoot the targets and you built a score. And all in all, it had about 100,000 downloads and was number one on the target shooting Windows store. And most people joke that they didn't know that there were 100,000 Windows Phone users. But yeah, that got me some experience in .NET. And then I went into my first job interview that was successful, and they spent most of the time playing the game rather than interviewing me and gave me the job. So that was kind of my start. And from there, I just carried on in the .NET C# world and had varied experience in different places. So that was a very good company to start at. I've worked at some companies which were quite cowboyish and the complete opposite, but then had built experience of bringing good practice into those companies. So that kind of helped round me as a person. More recently, mostly working in distributed systems. So a lot of message based. Many people would call them microservices, but careful with the language because we try and design our systems around a specific domain focused scope rather than putting the micro and just making things small. So that's kind of my day job, and I'm leading a team there. But then by evenings and weekends, I'm now a co-founder of Powered 4 TV. So that is an independent wrestling video on demand service in the UK. And we've built that in Blazor, which is kind of why I'm here today.
There was something you'd said there about you went straight from school into full-time work, and how that you decided to pivot a little bit, and I love that. I love that when someone has is able to sort of look at where they are and go, is this where I want to be? How do I get to where I can be? And takes that big, dangerous first scary step of sort of pivoting away. We did have a conversation on a different show, Tabs and Spaces, about whether university actually prepares you for, the real world of development. And I think there's something that you hit on then, that because the degree, I mean, I'm going to change your words, right? So this is me interpreting what you've said.
Yeah.
So this isn't actually what you've said, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'd said because the degree was in Java and you had a little trouble finding work in Java, right? You took that as hey, why don't I build something for the device that I have sat in front of me? And I think that again is a wonderful example of pivoting. You've gone, hey, I have this experience in this language that at the moment in time, right now, no one seems to be hiring for. So why don't I take what I already know in this language, learn a brand new toolchain, a brand new language, and build a game with it? And I think that's something that a lot of developers, when they first start, I'm worried about the word evangelical, but I'm going to use it. They go, hey, I've been trained to use this particular language or this particular framework, and that's all I will ever use. And as good as that attitude can be, I think that it limits you somewhat in both your career prospects and also just your knowledge of development, right? Because if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Exactly. And I think there were Java interviews that I had at the time, but I also learned I messed up a lot of interviews through that inexperience, I think. So there were jobs around. And kind of touching your point that to kind of build more experience in the Java base to get a job, I wasn't really that passionate, but the idea of I've got my phone, I want to make a game for my phone, that was the motivation to spend like evenings and weekends like learning that. Whereas maybe if I had an Android phone, maybe the Java I would have pursued more, but I didn't. I had a Windows phone and Silverlight, so...
I think that's the key point that you've raised there about when people come to me and say, hey, I want to learn programming. What should I do? Or, hey, I want to learn this language. How do I learn to do this in this language? I'll say, don't worry about learning to do X, Y, or Z. Worry about how you can build something that either enhances your life or build the thing that you want to build, right? Because if it's something that you are passionate about, and I guess we'll get onto that in a moment with the Powered 4 TV stuff, but if it's something that you're passionate about, like you said then, I've got a phone, I want to make a game for it. Well, that's going to drive you through those difficult times when you're staring down the barrel of, why is this not working? I'm learning, like I said earlier on, a brand new toolchain, a brand new language. Why is this not working? And I can't find the answer. Well, the thing that will power you through that, I think, is the fact that you have the passion for the thing that you are doing, right?
Yeah, 100% agree. And I'm sure, yeah, like you say, it's easy to lose focus. So if you haven't got the passion on that thing that you're building, you just give up, possibly.
Yeah, totally. I'm not trying to say that passion is required for development, but what I'm getting at is, let's say I decided tomorrow that I want to learn how to do machine learning. Well, doing machine learning, to wrap the bunny quotes around it, is a huge topic, right? But actually, if I want to utilize a machine learning algorithm to do some kind of data mining on a data set that I'm really interested in, well, guess what? I'm going to learn how to do that one particular problem. That gets me over the hump of learning how to install Python if I need to install it, learning how to get the machine learning tools up and running, learning how to sanitize my data inputs. It gets me past all of that, because those are pretty non-trivial tasks to solve before you can actually get around to the actual learning of something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you.
So with that said then, let's talk Blazor. You hinted at Silverlight earlier on because that's what was being used by your phone. Let me just start by saying this. My entire experience with Blazor was the 0.30 public preview, the first sort of public beta that they released. I read about it over the lunch period that I had whilst they were releasing it. And I was like, does anybody want to stay around after work? I'll get some pizza and we could just build some stuff with Blazor if you want. Don't have to. And there was like 5 or 6 people were like, yeah, let's build something in Blazor. Yeah, I think it was more, yeah, let's sit around and eat pizza. But I mean, I'll take that as a win. I don't mind. I don't mind buying friends. No, what I'm getting at is that I know that when Blazor first started, there was a lot of pushback from a lot of long-in-the-tooth developers saying, this is just Silverlight all over again. Be prepared for them to drop support for it.
Yeah, this is it. So I think the difference with Blazor and Silverlight is Silverlight was a plugin, whereas Blazor is built on top of those web standards. So it's safe and secure in that respect. It's not like it will work on any modern browser, any device, no plugins required.
Yeah, I think a lot of the maybe more junior developers or just the people who weren't there for Silverlight and similar, they don't realize that you would hit a website and you'd get a modal dialog pop up that says, hey, you need to install this system level software to be able to view this website. And you'd click OK and it would take a few moments to install something. And then you'd find, oh, right, so it's just HTML then. But they're doing something clever that requires me to install a driver. Was it really worth it? But yeah, a lot of people, I guess, don't realize just the amount of effort that was required to get over that, especially if you were dealing with a security person and they were going, you want to what now? I'm sorry, what?
Exactly. It's just more barriers to using your app, which ultimately, if they drop it, you're dead in the water. But yeah, with those web standards, you've at least got a leg to stand on.
Absolutely. So, like, if Microsoft decided tomorrow, they're not going to, I'm sure. I don't work for Microsoft. I'm sure Steve doesn't work for Microsoft. We're not speaking for Microsoft. But if Microsoft decided tomorrow, hey, Blazor doesn't matter anymore, we're walking away, then it would still work in the browser because, like you're saying, it's built on those open web standards, right? It's standards that are supported by Google and Mozilla and all of the different browser vendors. They've all sort of come together and say, yes, this is how it should work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all open source, so we can fork it, and me and you, Jamie, we can create our own flavour of Blazor.
I like it. Flazor. That's Blazor. What we'll call it.
Perfect.
So, for the folks who may not have heard about Blazor or the 1 or 2 episodes we've done on Blazor in the past, what is it? I know that it's something .NET in my browser, but the 2 somethings there mean magic, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think everybody's now probably heard of a single page application. So that's a website where I can like click on links or take actions inside of the web page. And rather than it doing a full browser page refresh for every link that I click or every action that I take inside, the single page app will just sort of do a partial render. Like it will just change the bits that need changing rather than doing that full page refresh. So a lot of the common examples that everyone's going to have heard of, things like Angular, Vue, React, they're all examples of single page app libraries or frameworks in the JavaScript ecosystem. And so Blazor is like that. But within the .NET ecosystem, it's like the Microsoft single-page application solution. What's different about it compared to those like Angulars, Vues, Reacts, and all of the others is that we're actually writing C# that's our application code rather than JavaScript. And that means that we can use all of those familiar tools like Visual Studio or Rider, VS Code, whatever it might be. We can use all of those same tools and the same like NuGet packages and all of that ecosystem we can use and share our C# classes between the front end and the back end as well, which we haven't really been able to do until recently. The question of how can it work? Because obviously the browser, it can't run C#, it can't run DLLs. So how does this magic work? There's a few answers to that. So there's a few different hosting models. So there's server-side hosting, which was the very first model to come out. So that is where the server serves up some basic HTML, and that has a little bit of JavaScript inside of it. And that JavaScript will open up a SignalR socket to the server, and all of your C# application code that would otherwise be JavaScript if it was a React app, for example, is running on site on the browser, and then working out what needs to be shown, and then sends that data back down to the browser via the SignalR connection. And that JavaScript looks at me like, I need to show hi Jamie as a H1 tag in the page. And then when you take your actions inside the page, it then sends those back up to the server, which then calculates what the next thing needs to show, what the delta is, sends that back down the wire, and it's updated. So we create this circuit between the client and the server, which is good, but does have a couple of drawbacks that you've inherently got that latency through the traffic of having to go from your browser to the server each time. But the payload's very small, but it's still that latency. Also, the server needs to maintain that state, so it needs to know like the state of your app. So there are some questions around the scalability and what happens if you lose your connection. But yeah, there's solutions to help you with those problems, but you are adding in that complexity. So then there is Blazor, Wasm, or WebAssembly. I think WebAssembly is often shortened to Wasm, which is like the WASM. So that is doing pretty much the same thing as the server hosting, except rather than the application code running inside the server, it's running inside the browser. But we've already talked about that C# and .NET code can't run inside the browser. So, like, how is it working? Well, the team have actually compiled a .NET interpreter to WebAssembly. So WebAssembly it's a bit like JavaScript, like all modern browsers know how to run it. So it can be used as a target for other languages to compile to WebAssembly. And then the browsers know how to run that. So they've compiled a .NET interpreter that I think is based off Mono. And that will effectively run your application code by loading in actual .NET DLLs, interpreting those, and then telling the JavaScript to update the DOM. And so then the JavaScript will update what you're seeing. So that will show the H1, hi Jamie.
So server-side Blazor sounds a little bit like your standard kind of MVC style web application. It just has that sort of constant connection. So that to me sounds like going from MVC in, say, ASP.NET Framework to Blazor with .NET 5 seems like a bit of an easier step to take. It's not the code you're writing is being transpiled and stuff like that. You don't have to worry about that too much, right?
Yeah.
But the client-side stuff. So first comment I'm going to make about the client-side stuff is, you want to run what in my browser? right? Because you said there it's loading actual DLLs. You know, I'm guessing the DLLs that we would normally find like on your system, right? You do a .NET new, it's going to craft some code. You do .NET build, it's going to create a DLL, and it's basically that DLL, right?
Yeah, that's it. The WebAssembly is actually more locked down than JavaScript is. So WebAssembly doesn't have direct access to the DOM, but anything that you can't do in JavaScript in the browser, you also can't do in WebAssembly. So I can't send down a DLL to write some malicious files to your hard disk.
That totally makes sense. To be fair, I feel like that was a bit of a leading question. I kind of knew that one anyway, but, you know, for a lot of people who are new to this kind of thing, they're like, you're running what in web? But yeah, WebAssembly, it's sandboxed, right? So you don't have to worry about it. And like you said, if you can't do it in JavaScript, you definitely can't do it in WebAssembly.
This is it. Like you mentioned, the server Blazor is it's close to MVC. And for a lot of MVC apps, people will be accessing Entity Framework directly. So the next question is, well, will people be calling Entity Framework from my client-side app with a Blazor client? No, you're safe. Generally, you would kind of switch more to what happens in other spas, and you'd make API calls to access data. You wouldn't try and access your SQL Server database directly from the Blazor Wasm app.
Now you say that. Never dare a fool is what I'll say to you, Steve.
I mean, you could try, but also you would have to do it on purpose, and I don't know how well that would work. You're not going to do it by mistake.
Oh, totally, yeah. You know, I was just being sort of facetious and silly, but yeah. It's kind of like any other technology, right? You use the bits that work and use other bits of technology for the bits that don't really fit the problem domain, right? So you said there yourself, you know, if you need some data, you put in an API request and it'll go to the API. The API will talk to the database, transform that data and send it back to you, right?
Yeah, this is it. And I think most people are pretty comfortable with that. It's not new. It's not going to blow anyone away.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about Blazor, but let's talk about the reason for you sort of reaching out and wanting to be on the show, right? There's this real-world Blazor app that you hinted at earlier on, that you and some colleagues have built, that actually uses Blazor in the wild, right? When I first started playing around with Blazor, the big argument from my then boss was, yeah, but why? We can still do it as a SPA, we can still do it as MVC, we can still do it with API calls. So why .NET in the browser? So you've built this app, right? And it is Blazor in the wild. It's a real-world application, right?
Yeah, as you say, because it's new. I say new. We're talking years. I think it was like September 2019 that the first version of Blazor Server came out. So was it 2 years? And like obviously it was maturing a lot through development before then in lots of previews. So it's new. But you kind of touched on why did we choose Blazor? We didn't choose it at first. Just to convert, like this is a side project. So my brother-in-law a few years ago, he was taking his son to a lot of wrestling shows, and they missed some shows. And I think there's some like he just wanted to catch up. He enjoyed them. So my brother-in-law had this great idea of, we should build the Netflix of wrestling, and we'll get all of the like UK independent wrestling, which actually there's a lot of. I had no idea, but there's hundreds. Let's build a platform for them so everyone can catch up on all their favourite shows, and we'll build a community around it. And it's like, yeah, awesome, let's do it. That sounds like a fun little side hustle. So I actually started building it in React.js, so had a bit of experience around that from work. But I would probably suggest I'm a fairly typical .NET developer when it comes to front-end stuff. Like, I've historically done some web forms, some MVC, jQuery, bit of Knockout, all those sort of older things which people don't tend to start with for new. And I also used a bit of AngularJS and a bit of React.js in the past. So I started out building it in React.js because that was my most recent experience. Not super deep experience. Like, I just changed some existing apps I didn't create from the scratch. So, you spend a weekend, get a basic site up and running. I want to use TypeScript. I miss the static typing. And so you spend your next weekend setting up Babel, Webpack, and whatever else just to get it. And you're like, perfect. Actually, we want to render on the server side. That's going to be quite important for us on SEO. So again, it's spending maybe another weekend to get that working. And because we're using React.js, that's a library and not a framework, there's many ways and many blog posts doing different things in different ways. So you're kind of trying your best to sort of get everything working together. And I wasn't enjoying it. I needed a bit more structure and opinion, especially for something that I didn't do a lot. I moved on to trying Next.js, which is a React framework. So they're much more opinionated using React. And that's good, but it's still fairly I don't do it day to day. So it's still quite a big learning curve. And then you do all this and then you do a npm or a yarn install and you've just got hundreds of deprecated packages and it's just tiring. And I'm doing all this work, but I'm not actually spending enough time on the value add, like the business value. I'm spending all this time on learning and understanding the ecosystem. And as someone who's more .NET, I haven't spent huge time in this. So everything is a learning curve or relearning. It's around that time that Blazor WebAssembly came out in Netcore 3.1, I think, or at least some of the previews. So it's like, let's give this a try. So creating a .NET new Wasm project, all of a sudden, you hit run, it just works. Like a bunch of the React components that were built in React, it's more or less a copy and paste over and just like a slight tweak of the syntax, and they just worked. And before you know it, you're being really super productive with all of the tooling that you know. You're not having to learn all new things. If you want to make an HTTP call, you're using HTTP client. You haven't got to figure out what the JavaScript equivalent is. Yeah, you're just super productive. So actually, I've rebuilt a lot of what I'd done in React previously very, very quickly in Blazor. In my experience, it's just a joy to use. Just really like it. And it's around that time as well that I brought Josh, who's the other developer working on Powered for TV. So he had a similar experience of sort of coming in from a .NET background and then just quickly understanding and getting up to speed. There are a few, not issues, but learnings that we still had to have. For example, we are using Auth0 for our authentication and authorization, and there wasn't at the time any tutorials of how to use Auth0. Most were focused around Identity Server or Azure B2C. So there's some learnings and still a lot to figure out, but actually it's all within that ecosystem. So we had a much better time and much more productive. Then what are some of the drawbacks of using Blazor? Well, when we started, it was missing some functionality. For example, I mentioned server-side rendering before. Blazor didn't support any server-side rendering or pre-rendering, but actually there was a bit of a fudge that we could do to get it in at the time, which was kind of good enough. But you could kind of render the content as a static content and sort of fudge. But then in newer versions like .NET 5, they officially supported pre-rendering on the server for Blazor Wasm. But that again had a problem that it didn't maintain the state. So when you went to the site, all of the HTML was there, all of your beautiful content showing, and you're like, great. And then there'd be this flash or a flicker. And what was happening is that the app was then like initializing and being like, I need to render this content. So I will make my HTTP call out, and maybe I'll show the little loading swirly there, and then redraw it on the page. So that it was good enough, but a bit annoying. But actually, we jumped onto the .NET 6 preview builds early, I think preview 2, because they fixed that, or they added functionality for that. So you could preserve the state on the server side and then effectively hydrate the state within the Blazor app, and you would eliminate that flash. And it's from there that actually for the past, 7-8 months, we've been upgrading our app to the latest .NET 6 preview with every release, which is always very exciting. It feels like Christmas each time. So we've been using the latest and greatest preview features, as well as suffering any of the pain that comes with using the most recent previews. But overall, we've had a really positive experience.
That's awesome. I do want to point out, though, as someone who is known to his family for being the computery, programmery type IT person, you actually answered the call to let's make the Netflix of and actually built it. It's like, that's the thing that I get told all the time. Hey, Jamie, why don't you go and build the Facebook of truck drivers or the Netflix for fishermen? And I'm like, because A, it's initially a stupid idea, and B, you want me to put all the effort in for you to swoop in at the end and take all the credit. My hat is off to you, Steve, for actually taking the risk.
I've still got my full-time job, so we haven't gone for all in yet. But I think what helps for me with that is having other people as well. For example, wrestling isn't my passion. I've now been to quite a few wrestling shows and I really like it, but it's not my passion. But actually, part of what has kept me interested in this is using Blazor. It's been quite fun, especially because it's new and sort of learning, and having people who are super passionate about wrestling, and like their passion almost comes through and helps my passion. Like I'm not so passionate, but I'm passionate about the tech, and I'm like, yeah, let's make this awesome thing. And when you then add a feature and see their, like, the delight that it brings them and the customers, is awesome.
So you talked about earlier on, you said that there are mainly two different ways to host Blazor, right? The server side and this client side. And you talked a little bit about how you've got some server side pre-rendering. So does that mean that Powered for TV is server side, or is it client side, or is it some kind of hybrid? How does it work?
Yes, good point. So we have a server side project that is hosting our client side project. So that is just like an ASP.NET web API project effectively, but it's serving up that HTML and all of the Blazor stuff. By default, you can do that, and it will just send the HTML index page down, and you'll see a nice little loading screen whilst the app initializes, just for a second or so. You can actually still do that, but render the content on the server. So rather than sending down like an empty index page with a loading screen and then it initializing the app and showing everything, it will render that HTML content on the server and then serve that rendered HTML content. So you lose that initial loading that you might have seen on some pages.
So the app uses the server-side Blazor, or is it both?
Okay. So yeah, we are pre-rendered on the server, but the actual app is a Blazor client-side WebAssembly app.
Okay.
If that makes sense. So effectively, the server is rendering that Blazor Wasm app, like the static HTML, serving that to the client, and then like that's it. Like that's all the server does, that initial render. We're not doing any of that signal R connection or anything like that.
Right, so it kind of fits a little more along the lines of what a traditional SPA sort of service would be, I guess. You've got a server which pre-renders your page, sends that down the pipe with some JavaScript and some stuff to say, hey, here's the next bit. You go ahead and do your thing. And I'll be over here with the API if you need me, sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. For a lot of people who are sort of new to this idea of Blazor, you get told there's two ways to do it. You don't get told you can mix and match until someone then asks, I'm operating on, incredibly sensitive data, at which point someone immediately then goes, well, you leave that on the server, don't you? And you just sort of poke at an API, and then it's almost like it then goes, oh, right, so I don't have to do both. I genuinely, honestly feel like that's something that was initially missing from a lot of the conversations that were happening around that time, whether it was expected by Microsoft and the folks who were really excited about Blazor that you would just go, oh, well, of course I'll have an API, or whether it was expected that people would ask. It didn't seem to me like there was much thought about, we need to let the people know that you can do either of these, and you can even I read somewhere that you can include jQuery in your pages as well if you really want to, or, you can have extra parts of your website or your web app that are in other languages and frameworks, right? You don't have to go all in.
Yeah. And I think actually you can sort of embed Blazor into existing MVC apps. So I think you can render them as a component. So if you just have a specific part that you want to be Blazor within your wider app, you can. Then I think you sort of mentioned having something like jQuery or something else inside of Blazor. You can. So they've got a nice model for interoperating with JavaScript. So you can talk to JavaScript, and JavaScript can also talk back to .NET. And they use now JavaScript modules as well. So it's quite nice. The thing to be careful of there is you kind of mentioned jQuery, and I think that's traditionally used for a lot of DOM manipulation. And so if you're, adding rows to a table in jQuery, Blazor's not going to know about it. So next time Blazor does a render, you might lose what you've got there, what you've added. So do be careful when you're mixing and matching. Probably Blazor where possible, and then JavaScript as a necessity.
That makes sense, right? Because, my understanding, now this will be off because I haven't really looked at Blazor since those early previews, but my understanding is that Blazor has almost like how React has like a shadow DOM. It does something similar from my very old understanding of old knowledge. And it has this idea of this is a copy of what's being displayed on screen. And that way, like you say, when I get the new DOM, the new data from the server, I can then do that delta and figure out, oh, all I need to do is add 2 rows to this table, or all I need to do is insert this picture.
Yeah, exactly that. I think it re-renders the shadow DOM effectively and then does the delta between the last, and it's like, everything's the same, I don't need to update anything, or list has been added or removed, I need to update those bits.
I work mostly in enterprise level business line apps and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if I ship something that doesn't have tests, I feel a bit weird and a bit worried. I know that there are testing frameworks for Angular and React and Vue and things like that. And I know that, because you've said it, Blazor uses C#. So can I just use XUnit, or is there a different paradigm for testing Blazor stuff?
So we've got BUnit that can be used with XUnit and the other test frameworks. So BUnit's a library that's created by a guy called Eagle Hansen, who's a very nice person. He chatted with me on Twitter. You can use that to render a component in isolation and then make assertions against that component. So if you were to render a button and you were going to pass in a text that should be displayed on that button, you can render that and then assert the expected HTML marks, or you can pick out properties of that and say, like, I expect there to be a attribute which is this, or the button to do whatever. And then because you render that button, you want something to happen when that button is clicked. So you can also pass in the action of what you're expecting to happen when the button clicks, and then assert that that happens as well. And because I don't think we touched on it, that Blazor is very much a component model, very much like React. So we've got a choice on what we test. So you might create some like very low fundamental building blocks, or I think some people might call them atoms in atomic design, and test those. But then you can kind of take a step back and then build some larger components. And then in Blazor, a page is just a component as well. You're then thinking about what scope do I want to test, and like what is appropriate to test here. And so I'm sure there's lots of opinions around that, but you've got all of the same testing that you've got. So if you're already using something like React and you're used to testing with that, it's the same paradigm. How we're doing testing, so we've tested like a lot of our base components. We didn't test from the beginning, which has actually caused us more pain. So I think probably my advice would be to write tests as you go along, rather than trying to backfill them later if you are doing a serious project. But yeah, so we're testing like the small components that work because they're the building blocks for larger. And then we're picking, scoping other components to like a meaningful bit of functionality and testing around that. We also use Playwright, which is like a Selenium competitor. So that actually can load up a browser and run against it. So we've used that more for almost like some smoke tests of like when you go to the page, does the page render? And that's quite useful for making sure like we do a deploy to our development environment and then run these smoke tests, and that makes sure that we don't have that. It just runs on my machine. And like as well, obviously a bit like Selenium, you can do anything, like you can click buttons, click links, verify whatever. So we've been looking at some of our core flows of using that to just double check some of our flows, like being able to sign up, actually works in reality. And it's a lot easier to test something like that as a flow with Playwright, in my opinion, than trying to test it via like component testing. So I think it's thinking about what you're going to test at what level to give you that confidence. There is also Verify, which I think you'll probably come across if you've looked at Blazor testing. And that's more around the snapshot testing. So I think with that, effectively, you'll have a component or a page, and that will get rendered, and then that will output the HTML markup to a file. And then the next time you run that test, it will do exactly the same and then compare the HTML. Then you can look at it, and if there is a difference, it will flag it, and you can say, yes, I'm happy with this change, or no, I'm not. But it kind of gives you that ability to see what's actually rendered. So it's an option. I think people, again, in the JavaScript world are probably quite familiar with that style of testing. We don't use it. I think it's one of those things where like we might use it in conjunction with the other testing, but I don't see it as a replacement for that other testing, because I've worked in an environment with React where there was a lot of that, and then all of a sudden you've just got HTML diffs for everything in a pull request, and you're like, yeah, looks kind of fine. There's like 20 HTML files that so I think like anything, using the right tool for the right job.
Sure, that's good to hear that there's a lot of testing that can be done, because like I say, if I'm building something for an enterprise, or I'm building something for someone, my vision would be to hand over code that I know does what it should do, And that's what I use tests for. I mean, other people use them for other things, but for me, it's a belt and braces. I know that anyone else can run these tests, and the code is doing what it should do because, I'm asserting that it's doing it. So that's good to know that there's testing frameworks and lots of different ways to test things with like Playwright and things like that.
I'm a big fan of test-driven development as well. And so I was trying to write some of these components more in a TDD style rather than bashing out loads of HTML markup and then testing it. Actually, it worked quite well. So I started sort of writing more kind of fluent assertions because that worked with the TDD style quite nicely. So I have created a project on GitHub, which I haven't yet set up the CI/CD pipeline for, but hoping that a Blazor B-unit fluent assertions type library might be useful for other people. So I'll share that. We'll see if anyone else finds it. The creator, Eagle, he saw it in the Blazor community stand-up and he told me to create it as a library. So I'm doing it for him.
Excellent. Well, be sure to send that link through to us before this episode goes out, and I'll make sure it's in the show notes.
Fantastic. Yep.
But yeah, definitely check the show notes, folks, and go check that out. Sounds like it would be really quite useful if you're getting into Blazor and you're a fan of TDD. I'm a fan of TDD. I'm also, all of the different letter DD, the behavior driven and all that kind of spec driven and all that kind of stuff, because then, if you've got all of these constraints on you, it feels to me like I build software that fits those constraints. But let's not talk about that, because some people get a little bit upset about that, and we're not trying to start a flame war here, folks. We're just talking about Blazor, right?
Yeah. I mean, so long as it works, it's all good, isn't it?
Absolutely, right? There's a time for testing and there's a time not to test, and I'm not here to say about either of those. But let's talk about the app then. So you said it's called Powered for TV, and it's all Blazor, is it? So it's the smoke test for Blazor, right?
Yeah, this is it. So as I say, it's pre-rendered on the server, but it's all Blazor. So yeah, have a look, check it out. Obviously, this is a weekend and evening project, so there's lots of improvements that we know we want to make and we'll eventually get to. For example, we don't have a good search solution at the moment, which, being a site full of content, that's high up on the list of things to do. Making sure that all our customers have a good experience, can find what they're looking for.
I mean, searching is hard. A lot of people don't actually think about how difficult it is to provide a user with a free text input and to be able to search that text on everything and then display it in a way that makes sense. Like, everybody just assumes, oh, well, I've used Bing and I've used Google, and if I've been around long enough, I've used Yahoo. And they just assume, oh, I just type it in and it just comes back, right? That's easy. Searching is easy. It's really not, folks. It's really not.
I was thinking about having a look at the Azure Cognitive Search and seeing how far we can get on their free tier, because I think that's effectively Microsoft's implementation of Elasticsearch. So they do have a free tier, so we might give that a go and see how we get on.
See, that's the thing that I was thinking about the other day. I was talking to someone the other day about how you could effectively build a large-scale make me loads of money application on the free tiers of stuff, or the very low-cost tiers of stuff, if you engineer it really well. Like the serverless stuff, Azure or AWS or Google, whoever, right? You could probably get away with building the majority of an app using serverless stuff for free, right? Because you only get charged after so many compute seconds or minutes or whatever it is, right? Seeing how far you can get away with using a service that already exists, and if it already exists, that means it's a solved problem, right?
And I think as well, when you're looking at this, we are using Azure Functions, but not for our APIs. So, but what we do have is Azure CDN over the top, and we cache. So when you go on the website, we've only got a fairly short cache, but it does mean if someone's there, hits refresh on the browser 100 times, our server is only going to get one API call, as it will be cached in the CDN and it will have the cache on the user's browser. And so actually that means we can keep our, like all of the public, like the show details, the channels, because we've got like a 5 or 10 minute cache. So it just means we get maybe an API call or two every 5 or 10 minutes, rather than if we have a load of 10,000 people coming on the site at once, we've still only had that 1 or 2 API calls thanks to the CDN. So we can probably try and leverage that same of putting the CDN on top of the search to at least reduce some of the traffic. And again, that helps keep some of those costs down and performance up.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by sort of engineering it. As long as you're, rather than just sort of hacking it together. I'm not trying to say in any way that you and the folks who are working on this are hacking it together. I'm just sort of speaking into the ether, right? If you're willing to put the time into figuring out how you're going to engineer something to put it together, you probably find that you can do it cheaper than you thought you could, or you can get away with cool little tricks, like you're saying. There's a CDN and the user's cache inside the browser. And if you can leverage both of those, then why bother pulling another half a megabyte of images, which doesn't sound like a lot when you're pulling it down to your phone or whatever. But when you're serving it from your server, and there's like you said, 100,000 people or 10,000 people or whatever, that's quite a lot of data, and you've got to pay for that data.
Like you mentioned images, like we are resizing the images. So like we store like an original full-sized image, but then we looked at some of the image CDNs that will do some of the resizing and things for you, but they're quite expensive, at least for our scale. So we've got an Azure function which will effectively resize the image based on like a whitelist of parameters. And then again, that's stored, and then the CDN's in front of that, so we don't resize the image every time. And we've got a whitelist as well to stop people abusing us. But yeah, like if you imagine that 10 new shows came on and loads of people all came on the site at once, that image processing is expensive, so that could easily lead to a bad customer experience, whereas actually it's not so bad.
That's cool. What's exciting in the future for Blazor then? What's the thing that's making you go, oh my goodness, can they just ship it now and I can use it now?
So what I'm super excited about, which we could look at now, but we haven't had a chance, but that is Maui, Project Maui. So I think that is the next evolution of Xamarin Forms. So the multi-application user interface, so that you can create your apps that run on iOS, Android, tvOS, Windows, all of those good things. But they've actually added in a web view, so you can effectively embed your Blazor application inside a native app, which will give us. That was again one of the reasons we actually went with Blazor, because we were like, that could work nicely for our mid to long term plan. So the Maui app will actually run your Blazor code, but with that native performance. So you're not just embedding Chrome inside a window into the app. It's actually smart enough that CLI will run that .NET code, and you'll get all of those benefits of jitting and all that good stuff. And it also means you can add in some native components and do notifications. So I think Josh, the other developer, he's started to have a bit of a look at that and a bit of a spike, but that's where we think it's quite a strategic move that we can then take what we've got as a site, which we've been able to iterate really quickly on, and then appify it, if that's a real word.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I'm really interested to see what Maui becomes, because I remember I remember watching a talk at one of the .NET Confs. It must have been 2 or 3 years ago now. And there was Miguel de Icaza showing off, I think he called it Terminator at that point in time. And it was like, hey, here's my Xamarin app. But hey, look, here it is running on the desktop on Ubuntu. And now it is, push a button, it recompiles, and here it is on Mac OS. But it's a Xamarin app, right? And then he went, oh, but hey, guess what? I push a button and there it is on my phone. And I think, it's this wonderful evolution of, let's just make it easier for people to do stuff, right? Because that's what I love about programming in general, regardless of the technology used. It's all about making it easier for people to do stuff. And I absolutely love that. So I honestly can't wait for like the first sort of public releases. I know that there are a couple of preview builds, but I can't and that comment is going to be way out of date by the time this episode releases. But at the time of recording, I know that there's some like public previews, and I know that there's talk of supporting different formats and supporting different operating systems and things like that for different things. But I love this idea of, like you say, I don't have to embed Chrome. There's nothing wrong with Chrome, but if your app is showing a chart, right, and it's just, I need to be interactive with this chart, you don't need to pull down Chrome or rather Electron, which is, Chrome Lite. You don't need it to immediately have the 70 megabyte dependency,
Yeah, exactly. We're super excited about that, and I think that would be a nice possible strategic thing, especially if it's made really, really easy. Like that, you watch some demos and it looks easy. I think at the moment with the previews is the getting all of the tooling installed. But I think once that's in, hopefully we'll be super productive in that and have an app in the stores. Then there's the other app store stuff to work out. But, but technically it should be fun and easy.
So tell us a little bit more about the whole site that you've thrown together, and then let us know about how folks can get in contact with you if maybe they've got a question that we couldn't cover, or maybe they just want to get in touch and say, holy moly, this is awesome. Like, how do they do that?
Yep, so the site is Powered for TV. Jamie, if you're happy, I can give you a promotion code for a 3-month trial for anyone that wants to have a play.
You heard it here first, folks. You want a free month of wrestling content? Do it. I don't mind. I mean, I'll happily hold my hands up in the air and say, I'm a pro wrestling fan. It's loads of fun to watch. Yeah. There's the outcome is predetermined. Who cares, right? You're living in the moment. The same with an action scene in a film. The outcome is predetermined. So let's get past that, right? It's loads of fun to watch for me. Totally, yeah. If you're into pro wrestling, Steve is about to read out a promo code if you want a free month. Why not, right?
Here we go. We'll go dotnet.net, as that can be the promo code for a 1-month free trial.
Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes too, obviously, in case you're driving or whatever.
Perfect. And like you say, when you see these, like, these are athletes, so you might not appreciate the storylines that they have, but when you see them like doing these like triple somersaults off the ropes onto, and like they're really actually doing these things. It's not pretend, like, and they do feel the pain as well of a lot of these things. So awesome. And yep, to get in touch with me, I am on Twitter at @SRPeirce, which I will spell, which is at SRPEIRCE.
Any other ways to get in touch with you? Or like if folks have a question about how it's all put together without giving away the secret sauce, are you willing to answer questions if somebody wants to say, hey, Steve, I'm interested in Blazor. Can you put me in the right direction? Are you open to that?
Yep, absolutely. So I was on the ASP.NET Core Blazor community stand-up a while back where we talked about Powered for TV and how we built it and answered questions. I'm super happy to do that again, or talk to anyone about anything. So yeah, you can, if you want me to do any talking or Q&A, happy to come along and do that, or reach out to me on Twitter.
There's also as well, Steve has been very kind enough to send over like a 10,000 foot view architecture diagram of how the whole system was put together. I will put that into the show notes. So if you are listening, you didn't hear it, but I just asked Steve for permission. So if you are listening, click through to the show notes and there'll be an image embedded in those show notes that shows you like all of the different components and how they all fit together. And you can really see that it is Blazor and lots of Azure functions and stuff like that, so I can imagine that it's been quite an engineering task to throw it together.
Yeah, a lot of fun. It's always good to have some learnings on side projects as well. So
I guess all that really remains to say, Steve, is thank you ever so much for coming on the show, talking to us a little bit about Blazor, giving me a refresher on Blazor, because there's lots of gaps in my knowledge. I haven't really had a chance to play around with it, and to let us know about to give us that free promo code for a month of wrestling content if you're interested in it. And obviously, please do go check out the website, even if you're not interested in pro wrestling, because this could be, maybe you're on the fence as to whether to build a Blazor app, or maybe your technical director or your boss is saying, no, we're not going to use Blazor. And you could point them at this thing and say, hey, look, here's a real world out. Yeah, the content may not sit well with you. You may not be interested in it, but look, this is in Blazor. And we could do something too. It can act as almost like a killer app. Just go check it out.
Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. Thank you ever so much. That was my interview with Steve Peirce about Blazor and Powered for TV. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show. And there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that. Or reach out via our brand new contact page. And definitely remember to come back next time for more .NET goodness. See you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NETcore Podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.